ఇక్కడ నిల్చొని మాట్లాడడానికి నాకున్న ఏకైక అర్హత నేను తెలుగువాడినని. I request your permission to speak in English. I would have been better off to speak in Telugu. The Ravindra Sharma ji that Srinivasa just spoke of comes from a place called Adilabad in Telangana. He has actually traveled all the way from the north, come to Hyderabad to study in the Arts College in Hyderabad, and later he went around looking for tribal art, settled in Adilabad where there are several tribal students and tribal people whose art forms they were forgetting. He stayed on there, learned their art forms, and over a period of time started teaching them to the tribals there, and they now see their entire culture through the eyes of Guruji Ravindra Sharma. I have a couple of points which I felt are relevant in the context of Parampara Bija Raksha, which is the thematic for this particular discussion and seminar. First point is relating to the nature of learning and living that we are currently part of. And in this mode, there was one aspect which Ravindra Sharma ji at one point made a specific reference to. There is a very important role of yajna that is there in the karmakanda of all Indian thought, which is presently following the Vedic traditions. And within that tradition itself, the understanding of yajna as it was performed earlier as opposed to what it is in current times is a question that Ravindra Sharma ji reflected on, specifically in the context of a series of Atiratra yajnas which were conducted in Andhra Pradesh over the past 5 years. You all are aware that conducting a yajna would involve yajna samagri and a lot of activities which might as well cost a lot. In the process, the point that Ravindra Sharma ji made was about, while yajna is certainly speaking of paralaukika, the kind of safalatva is known in the paraloka, yet what is it that is there in the ihaloka that we can necessarily get to understand? And in the process, he pointed out that if at all we imagine that a yajna performed at a place includes all the kind of samagri that goes into the yajna come from the local places alone, and that too coming from the traditional sources which make these, in the sense the kind of pots that are made belong to the community of potters who belong to a particular region. If you speak of the cloth that goes into the yajna, if it comes from the weavers of that particular region, all the kind of the money that gets spent on it is something that gets distributed over the communities which are present in the locale itself. But currently, in the context of a changed technological environment where there is a market which spreads across the local area to a global scenario, this gets spread rapidly. So the essence of how a yajna played a role and how it connected to people in the locale itself where it is actually conducted is something that has currently gone amiss. How does this connect get formed again is a question that he posed. On a second note, there was one thought that he reflected again which said, even to this day, several of samskaras that are there that we have inherited from our ancestors are still being followed to the extent possible by all believers. In that context, how does each of these samskaras relate to the nature of change in the society that has happened, and how do we as well understand the manner in which this can actually make sense in the light of the economics that is also spoken of by the Shastras, is a thought that is to be reflected upon. And there are varieties of these things which I am sure would get opened up in the context of this discussion. One final word that I thought can be brought up is in the context of the flow that is totally negating several kinds of paramparas that we are trying to and struggling to as well hold on to. There is an analogy of this which came down in the 1930s, and the analogy goes this way, that there are pillars for us who actually stood, though they could not possibly say oppose and swim against the tide of the flow of the things. They stood there and have given us a picture of how these particular flow is going on. That is, because they stood as pillars, they could as well grasp as to what is the nature of this flow. As this flow was going on, if you have these pillars who stood, we do have, say, such pillars who are sitting amongst us here. These pillars who stood, if we hang on to each of these pillars, then is it possible that there is a way by which this flow which is there can be split into different kinds of smaller channels, so that then over these channels you can actually have a swimming against the tide? This is a process that we could possibly imagine happen over a period of time, but if we see that our previous generations have tried to become these pillars who have actually tried to not, say, get thrown across by the flow, but have stood their ground, by hanging on to these pillars, can we reduce this flow in such a manner and split it so that the next generation that comes, or the next generation, can certainly hold on to these paramparas and also find a way to actually swim against the tide? With these few words, I think I'll give it to the